know who has access to what? This is the Identity at the Center podcast. If you're looking for identity and access management talk, you've come to the right place. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of Identity at the Center. This is the official podcast of me, Jeff Stedman. Jim, I'm hoping it's the official podcast of you as well. Is that right?
It's my one and only podcast, Jeff.
So far.
But I've been thinking about expanding out to other topics. So we'll see what happens.
I'm surprised you don't do a baseball one, to be honest with me.
Nobody wants to hear me go off.
Well, I've heard enough of it over the last few years. I'm always interested to hear what's going on in Yankee baseball from the great Jim.
I watch a lot of it. So, hey, Jeff, today we're joined by Mario Dusai. And I talked about Mario on our very first podcast. People can go back and listen. And I mistakenly said he was from Transmit Security. We later retracted that and corrected that. He's with Callsign. But we're very fortunate to have Mario on the call today. How you doing, Mario?
I'm doing great, Jim. Thanks, guys, for the opportunity to be here. Really excited about it.
It's great. Yeah. You and I have worked together for a long time in the financial services industry and later at Identity for several years. We were sorry to see you go, but we're glad to have you back for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's exciting. And, it's a very small space. So people never really leave. We're always going to work together at some point in the future. And I'm happy to be working with you again.
Yeah, great. So what have you been doing at Oracle? I mean, Callsign.
A lot of job changes. So Callsign, I'm a solutions architect. So basically, I'm responsible for several different things. Where I'm helping out on the pre-sale side. So we're doing a lot of, waving a flag about the technology, talking about what we're doing, and really trying to, get customers interested. And then I'm also doing, actual architecture. So designing systems, talking to people, and showing customers how this solution can fit into their environment and really bring value to them, and ultimately secure their environments in a better way.
So Mario, if you look at the website, right, there's a tagline that says real-time AI-driven identity and authentication solutions that confirm the user really is who they say they are at work and at home. What the heck does that mean?
That sounds pretty cool, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like a whole bunch of stuff. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, so it really is a whole bunch of different things, to be honest with you. And what we're really doing is we're taking the latest in machine learning and artificial intelligence and really threat indicators. And we're guiding users through the most secure and the most appropriate journey to make sure that we're letting the right people in based on all of these things that we know about them. So we're looking at behavior. We're looking at things about the device. Is there possible malware on the device? We're looking at how they interact with the device. We're also looking at location and other intelligent feeds that are coming in. And, in a split second, really like 50 milliseconds, we're making accurate decisions about their authenticity and letting them into the systems easily, requiring any additional friction where it's necessary. Does that help?
I think so. So, if I've got a phone, right, and I'm logging in maybe like a bank or something like that, you're taking some of the characteristics of my phone, maybe some of the sensors on it to help kind of place me and making sure that it's not, just my password is authenticating, but also giving some sort of, I would imagine there's like a risk engine behind the scenes that's providing some sort of, hey, you know what, if you're this level of risk, it's okay. Or if it's not okay, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Jeff, that's absolutely right. So we're looking at the way that you interact with the device. So, maybe you keep your you keep your username and password on a Post-it note, and somebody can get access to that. And then, typical system, so long as they're on your device, they can get in. So what we're looking at is the way that somebody's interacting with the device. So it's above and beyond the knowledge-based authenticators of username and password. And we're looking at behavior. So we employ a series of passive authenticators to detect, riskiness and authenticity of the person on the device. And if it looks like it's you, then we let them in. But if it looks like it's me trying to be you with your username and password, then we'll challenge them for, face recognition or fingerprint or something different. There's a plethora of different authenticators we can employ when it's necessary.
Interesting. How do you tune that? Or is there like an enrollment period? I guess how do you know it's me and not just someone who picked up my phone, I guess?
Right. Yeah. So first thing is we have a network of models, machine learning models, and we're not using averages, so to speak. Every model that we have is specific to each user. So in about, depending on the use case, about 5 to 8 logins, we're seeing that the models are reaching a level of maturity that we have now gathered enough behavioral data about you to make decisions going forward. So that's the learning period. It's really simple. It's like 5 to 8, sometimes less, sometimes more. All depends on different factors. But usually in that window, that's when we have enough data, and then we can let somebody in without ever stepping them up again.
It sounds very cool.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Hey, Mario. So what I think is cool about that is, I've always looked at authentication and as a best practice being a balance of security and usability. And so you and I have talked a lot about this offline, which is that you've really got a big focus on usability, but obviously we can't only focus on usability, just make this system easy to use. It also has to be secure, especially when you're talking about systems with highly confidential data or where you're doing financial transactions. So, but we've talked a lot about this usability and user experience, if you will. And you kind of came up with top 5 drivers for a good authentication user experience. I was kind of hoping you could kind of talk through those top 5 today. I think those would be really valuable for our listeners to hear about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can talk about that. Really, it's simple. I mean, there's the top 5. We'll summarize them, and then we'll get into the details. But authentication needs to be fast. It also needs to be easy. Accuracy is very important as well. You want to make sure that the right people are getting access and not the wrong people. Also needs to be intelligent and needs a level of flexibility. Now, to go back, responsiveness, like the speed of your authentication system, especially when you're looking for the B2C use case, when you're dealing with the external world and you're dealing with customers, the responsiveness of a system is very critical. If it's going to take, let's say, 30 seconds for me to access your bank versus, maybe 5 seconds for me to access somebody else's bank, and you have fundamentally the same products, the same interest or same interest rates, and everything else is the same. The only difference is the usability. So if I can get into one system a little bit easier than I can another, that's a competitive advantage. And I may deviate from working with one company because the system isn't as responsive. It's slow. It's clunky. I'm going to go with another bank that's a little bit more quicker, and it gets me on with my digital live a lot quicker.
Oh, and what are the factors that you think make for fast authentication? Because as you're talking about it, I was kind of thinking, when I authenticate to certain applications here, I'm recording from home, but if I record off or authenticate from my home network, it's kind of slow. But if I were at a public location where they had a free Wi-Fi, sometimes it's extremely fast. So it seems like the speed of my network connection has a big impact. But I think you're talking about something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really talking about the architecture behind the scenes. So, there's everything from the database all the way up, and then all the logic that's sitting on that login screen, for example. So there's a lot of layers to it that ultimately lead to a better response time.
So is it your experience that those the logic that needs to sit on the end client, that is something that slows down the process? Is that something that's required to give us an idea of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, certainly. So, responsiveness and the amount of time that it takes for a system to respond. So if I enter in my credentials, I'm expecting something to come back to me with a decision very quickly. So all the systems that are kind of sitting behind that login screen, they really need to be running at an internet scale. You have to be able to architect the systems to really minimize any sort of bottlenecks. So there could be bottlenecks on a database. There could be bottlenecks, on the UI design. There can even be bottlenecks with the challenges that you're asking me to go through during an authentication process, right? So there's not only the speed, the responsiveness, but then also the challenges that I'm having to go through to get into a system. So if we can find a way to, one, make sure that the systems powering all these decisions are scalable, right? That they respond quickly and they can handle a high volume of requests at once. That's going to be important. But then also not making everybody, let's say, go to an SMS token for every authentication, or every time I go from home to work, now I have to do a thumbprint or a face scan. So it's using it's intelligently authenticating me, and it's only stepping me up when it's required. So there's really two aspects that I look at for the quickness of an authentication system.
So I've got a question, Mario. How much does the level of encryption of a password have an impact on how fast an authentication would be? So, for example, if my credential store, I use a really complex hashing algorithm for encrypting my password. Is that something that could impact the fastness of my authentication?
Yeah, potentially it could. If you're, again, you need to find a balance between security and user experience. So if you're going through a very expensive encryption process for maybe something that's not a highly secure or high value asset, you may be using too many cycles and the encryption process may be too expensive for what you're securing. But the encryption method is one factor that plays into this, and also where you're doing the encryption or hashing, especially if we're talking about hashing, or if we're talking about passwords, it's better to use a hash than encryption. But depending on where you're doing the hash also comes into play. So maybe if you're doing the hashing on the client side, before you send the password down, then you're comparing hashes, you may save some time there. Now, if you're doing the hashing on the server side, now, of course, you're getting a lot of requests in at one time, and all, this one server has to do all of this work. You have to take that into consideration because now your server is being overloaded, because now it has to do hashing functions and then do the comparison and then send back a response. So that's absolutely one point of a bottleneck too.
Okay, great. So, moving on in your 5 keys, the next one you talked about was easy. And I think what you're talking about here is that the user experience needs to be, the other word for easy in my book would be intuitive. I kind of look at a screen and I know what to do. What else are you talking about there?
Yeah, listen, life is very difficult as it is. Getting on with our digital lives and getting onto our bank accounts shouldn't be that difficult. The technology is incredibly intelligent, and it has the potential to be even more intelligent. So we should be able to easily access our technology without a lot of hoops to go through, so to speak. So basically, you go to a login screen, it's intuitive. You know exactly what you need to do, and you should not have to be challenged if it's not necessary. So yeah, exactly. Intuitive interface is extremely important too. And on top of that, when we are challenged for step up, maybe I'm sure we're all familiar with these CAPTCHAs. Click on all the images that have a car, click on all the images that have a bunny rabbit in there.
Yeah.
I'm not a robot.
Yeah, it's not very easy.
Spend more time telling people you're not a robot. That's exactly what a robot would say.
That's true. But yeah, it's not exactly easy to go through a CAPTCHA. So that all plays into this, where we should be able to easily access our technology without all these complicated hoops and picking out these images. It's not a good experience.
I kind of feel like with Step Up, one of the things that you have to do, you have to think about your audience and what they're going to be familiar with. Everybody's familiar with SMS, one-time tokens, one-time passwords, but that's not the most secure mechanism. And then you have, for example, authenticator applications. I just, try to picture my dad using an authenticator application, and he would get frustrated and not know what to do. It's somebody who's in an office environment all day. That's something that they probably have experienced somewhere along the way.
That's right, and it's that's one extra app that you have to maintain on your device too. For example, I'll have a banking application, and then I also have a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator. So I have to manage two applications, one so I can get into my bank, and then another one so I can get the secure tokens to put back into the other application, rather than having everything integrated into one, where the authenticator is kind of deployed as an SDK as part of my banking application, for example. It's just it's not easy.
Right. I think that's a great approach. I mean, I'm looking at my phone now and I have 4 different authenticators. I have Microsoft, I have Google, I have a LastPass one, and then of course I have my most important one, which is the one that secures my World of Warcraft account. So the other ones I don't care if those get hacked, but don't mess with my WoW. But if it's built into the app, I think that makes it just a much better user experience for the user. But I also think that there's a component here where some organizations, they get focused on, this is what we're going to offer, this one single mechanism. And I think, people need to consider, Jim's dad in this example, where you may need to support a variety of mechanisms for that step-up authentication to make sure that your users can take advantage of it and that they are getting the user experience that works best, for them. It's not really a one-size-fits-all scenario sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to make this too salesy, but it's one thing that we take very seriously at Callsign. So our solution is extremely flexible, so that we can deploy and make sure that the right people are getting the right authenticators at the right time. It's because we understand, and everybody has to understand, that not everybody understands things at the same way, and not everyone has access to the same technology either. My dad, I hate to call him out here, but he still uses so he can't use an authenticator app. So maybe in that case, we need to do an outbound call, or we need to do something else for people like that. So authenticator apps wouldn't be good for Jim's dad or my dad.
I'm sorry, did you say your dad uses a flip phone?
Yes, he does.
So, hey, Mario, the third item that you had was in your top 5 factors for a good authentication user experience was accuracy. And I just throw in, to me, I was actually thinking what you mean by accuracy is, it's almost like the opposite of easy. So I want it to be easy to log in. But if I went to my bank's website and they said, log in with your Facebook, I'd be like, you got to be kidding me. In fact, as a security guy, if I went to my bank's website and they didn't offer 2-factor authentication, I'd freak out. I probably would change banks, just because I realized that usernames and passwords are just not enough to secure my finances with. So what kind of did you mean by accuracy? Does it have anything to do with that building user confidence?
Yeah, well, first of all, if your bank is using a Facebook authenticator or social authenticator, I would say move your money out of there, but chances are somebody will do that for you. So
before we get to involve that, what about Apple, right? So Apple just launched their credit card, and it's really a Goldman Sachs credit card, but you log in with your iPhone, and the whole catch there is, that they feel that's more secure because they would want to drive people towards Apple Pay and virtualized credit card numbers. But you don't really log into an account, so to speak. It's just really your iCloud account. which does have MFA, right? I think that's one of the requirements to have the Apple Card is that your iCloud account does have to have MFA. So maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot here as I bring it up, but I think they're an interesting use case because they're so heavily tied to the iOS ecosystem and kind of pulling that together. iPhone. It's also a great way to lock in people to iPhones because you can't really use the Apple Card outside of the iPhone experience. You can't pay a bill without calling them. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of missing from a traditional finance experience with it. I'm curious to see what your thoughts on if you've had a chance to take a look at that yet or not.
Yeah, I've only heard about it at a high level, but in general, like there's a whole the world is changing right now. The whole banking industry is changing. There's a whole series, a whole collection, a whole new group of these neobanks, these challenger banks that are changing the way that they're authenticating users. They're changing the way that users are registering for accounts, and they're really changing the way that people are banking. And Apple is just one example of them as well. And it's very interesting, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in this space as well. Because again, not only are they changing banking, but they're also changing all these security processes as well. And they're making our devices, our phones, really more and more critical. And it's not just banking. I mean, even in the automotive industry too. Now, I think Lincoln is coming out next year with the phone as a key. So now my phone is going to be critical for me to access my bank account. My phone is going to be critical for me to access and even drive my car, and even to access locks at home. With Bluetooth technology or NFC, I'm able to unlock my door lock at home and then get in. Yeah. So really changing the whole experience and really binding us to physical devices. So not only is authentication changing, but then we also need to look at how are we binding physical people, and how are we acknowledging who these people are first. How are we registering them, make sure we get the right people and not bots or malicious people. And then how are we linking a person to a device? Are we doing proper maintenance going forward and doing a strong link, let's say every 30 to 90 days to make sure that this phone still belongs to this person, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too far off the thing here, but I think it does play into accuracy for that authentication step, because the phone as a key thing is interesting to me. So I have, 2 cars that use phones as keys, and I don't have to authenticate to my phone to unlock the car. I just have to be near it from a proximity standpoint. Mm-hmm. As long as I have the phone with me, I can start the car and drive away, right? So if someone stole my phone, then there really isn't a check at that point to make sure that it's actually Jeff and his phone in the car and not Jim with Jeff's phone in the car. Yeah. And it works for both of those. It's a very interesting way to kind of approach it.
What I think about that, Jeff, is that it's no more or less secure than a key. It's just more convenient.
Yeah.
It would be more convenient, because if your phone is dead, it's probably not more convenient if it's your phone to drive.
And there's physical backup components to it, right? You've got a swipe card, proximity card, that kind of thing is typically the backup for a phone is key if it's not an actual key. So I have both of those as well. But I just thought it was, that's kind of an interesting way to talk about, when Mario talking about binding people to devices. I think that's a super interesting topic that's just going to get more and more important as we go along.
Yeah, and the point about the key, it's very true. But at least with these smart devices, we have the opportunity to now make sure that the right person is in possession of the device.
Yeah, I mean, you use the device characteristics, right? The cadence of my walk, the way the accelerometers report that, things like that. I think it's super interesting. I know number 4 on your list here was intelligence. Can you talk a little about what you mean by that?
Yeah, intelligence is basically the ability to understand and recognize various threats. So what I mean by a threat is, maybe there's a threat intel platform that's recognizing that there's some denial of service attack or some other attack coming from a certain IP range. Now, as a bank, we're seeing that somebody's trying to access our systems from that IP range. Well, we should be able to recognize these real threats that are out in the wild, and then sort of adapt our authentication journey based on this external feed, this risk signal, and say, all right, username and password are checking out, but maybe this is coming from a suspicious location because of what's going on currently. We'll step you up. Also have the ability to recognize whether or not there's bots that are trying to register and open up accounts, with synthetic identities, or maybe somebody malicious got access to hacked identities and now they're trying to register for accounts, or even log on with leaked credentials. So the systems need to be able to bring in a level of intelligence from various sources and make accurate decisions based on these feeds. If I'm trying to log into a system and my email address is found on haveibeenpwned.com, because it was leaked on some other hack, last year.
Right.
That should signal that this ID is a little bit risky because it was found on, found out as part of this, this hack. Now it should set me up or change my login journey somehow a little bit because I'm slightly more risky. So that's what I mean about intelligence. Really being able to detect threats, bots from real people, and then and adapt.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think this is one of the big reasons why developers should not go down the path of trying to build their own authentication system or use whatever kind of free utilities are out there for authentication or build into their server container. And they need to look at full-fledged IAM systems because there's so many. These threats are changing over time, and you need to continuously adapt. And that's why it's better to get a tool built by a company that's focused on nothing but securing the authentication journey.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. I mean, the developers are working in organizations. They have business apps and really cool apps that they want to be working on. There's no way that they can be keeping up with all of the changing business requirements. And also, by the way, continue to develop this security system and adapt for all these new threats, as well as stay on top of all the brand new technology with AI and ML. It makes sense to delegate in certain areas to the experts and let these other organizations hone in and get all their fraud and security experts to work on encryption systems, to work on authentication systems. And then you have your developers focus solely on making sure that they're writing the best possible applications for the business.
Absolutely. So number 5 was flexible.
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking there in terms of flexibility? Is, in my mind, I started going over to the flexibility on the app developer side, but we're talking about the user experience here. So what about the authentication user experience needs to be flexible?
Yeah, so I think we kind of started to bleed into it a little bit when we were talking about easiness, but flexibility is really bending and flexing on different things. So not only on risk and intelligence, but maybe as a user, and consent is going to be more and more of a hot topic. As a user, I do not consent to you as a corporation having access to certain data about me. So maybe you're using a fingerprint authenticator. Well, I don't feel safe using a fingerprint authenticator, so I don't consent to doing that with your organization. Okay, well, you don't want to lose a customer, so your system should be able to flex enough and say, well, fingerprint authenticator is not authorized for this user. Let's flex to something else and use a different sort of authentication mechanism, or put them down a different flow, so we're still getting the same level of authentication and making sure that we are accurately identifying this person, even though they said no to fingerprints. So maybe they want to use behavioral based only. So the system needs to be able to recognize that and really respect the user's consent choices on what they're okay using, what they're okay giving us as an organization.
Absolutely. So yeah, just to kind of touch on the flexibility that I was thinking of, applications are built by developers, and they and primarily what we've been talking about here today is the external type websites and phone apps and things like that, but customer facing or maybe partner facing, not employee facing. I think it's pretty clear that the SAML 2 standard plus the emerging standard, or it's not really an emerging standard, but OpenID Connect, but it's becoming more and more commonplace in the enterprise. But in my experience anyway, SAML 2.0 has got the lion's share of integrations for internal. But from an external, if I'm a developer building an important e-commerce or application facing my customers, I want to interact. I want to control the user experience, right? I want it to be strongly branded. I want it to look like the rest of my application. I don't want the customer to feel like they left my website to go authenticate and then they're coming back. Obviously the social ID stuff is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about stuff that has to be secured beyond that. But I want to control that experience. So I want it to exist within my front end, and I want to interface with an authentication system using APIs. So what are your thoughts there? I mean, what are you seeing?
You're right, Jim. Yeah, the ability to have a solution that can easily fit into your current system is also very important. So again, as you're integrating a system, properly documented REST APIs so developers can easily integrate your solution is going to be very critical for technology adoption. So there's also that aspect too. There's a flexibility from the user perspective, but then there's also the flexibility from the developer's internal perspective as well, for them to now love your technology and want to work with it, because not only is it providing a proper level of security, but it's also fun and easy to work with. We don't need to burden these developers with complicated SDKs and complicated APIs. Package everything up, abstract it appropriately, and then provide powerful documentation, Swagger documentation where they can interact with APIs, understand how the technology and the APIs work, and then integrate it quickly and easily. It's also very important.
Wise words, Mario. If only that was the way. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes a lot of times developers kind of take it upon their shoulders to do things, and I think that's where governance tends to play a role as part of the overall security and IAM strategy, making sure that there is a unified approach to doing that, or at least a standardized approach to making sure that people are taking advantage of the best practices when it comes to authentication, even authorization, those sorts of things, and trying to make sure that, like you said before, right, that developers are building the best application they can using the best security that's available to them from an organization-wide perspective, instead of spinning something up of their own.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think we could probably leave it there for now. So if I'm going to recap Mario's top 5 authentication things for a better experience, which I'm sure you want to trademark that name, it's going to be fast, easy, accurate, intelligent, and flexible. All things I think that pretty much anyone could agree with. So certainly appreciate your thoughts on that. Certainly want to thank you for joining us here. And for folks who are interested in learning more about Callsign and what they do, you can find them on the web at callsign.com. Also want to give a shout out to listener Neil, who shot us an email this morning around a question he had around the management of identity in a multi-cloud environment. That's a topic that Jim and I are going to be talking about in an upcoming episode, so definitely want to stay tuned for that. And as always, if there are any other questions or feedback, you can always send them over to questions@identityattthecenter.com. Mario, thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. This was great.
Hey, Mario, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way? Is it Twitter or email?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. Name is Mario Dusaj, Dusaj, and you can email me directly at my Callsign address. That's mario.dusaj@callsign.com. Don't be shy. Free to ask me any questions.
And I'll be sure to put some of this information in the show notes as well, so people can find it there. All right, so we're going to call it for this week. Appreciate everyone that's listening out there. Feel free to share the news, like, subscribe, 5-star ratings. Tell Jim's dad, tell Mario's dad, tell all your dads, tell everyone. Certainly want to keep this going.
If you told my dad to leave a 5-star rating, he'd probably say, "What is that?
What's a star? What's a rating? And what's 5?
What's a podcast?"
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you down the road.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.